Hi, it's Lisa, and welcome to Dauntless Leadership. So happy you're here, and wanted to let you know that we had so much great material in our conversations with our younger women, Gen Z and Millennial, that we split the episode. So here's part two with Lauren Pompey, Jamie Law, Maya Ben David, Allison Kent, Alexis Holder, and Danielle Padavano. Hope you enjoy it. All of us, including me at 61, are continuing to evolve. And that's why I'm asking this question to help people my age be better managers of people your age. And I think, Lauren, you said something important, as did Danielle, which is pouring into myself so I can be better. That's not always how I would have thought about it. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about taking care of yourself. One of the questions I told you I might ask is, how do we address the increasing focus on good mental health, right? That's not something that was talked about before, but it's really commonly discussed now in a much more comfortable way. And as managers and also as employees, something we should all be thinking about. So anybody have thoughts on that? Mental health, integrating it into work-life balance. And how do we do that? How do we inspire people to be their best and healthiest?
If you are not giving your employees a chance to be their best selves, they won't do their best work. And I think we've seen burnout in corporate America all the time. I had a friend who woke up one morning and couldn't feel her leg, and her doctor said it was completely stress induced. So
Hmm.
I do think we forget that mental health often affects your physical well-being as well. And I think companies need to prioritize it from the top down. So I know my mom works for a pharma company. They do every few months, you have a week of no meetings. You still are working, but you have no meetings. And that alone, I think that could save a lot of people, a lot of mental stress. But I think even how we talk about mental health, I think I've seen people talk about it often as this Gen Zers and mental health is all they care about thing. And it's this hush hush conversation instead of bringing it into normal everyday conversations. So I think if we can start opening the door first before people have to come through it, that definitely helps as well.
That's a great way to think about it, opening the door for the conversation, not having it be hush hush. And I'm always thinking about, what am I going to call this podcast? Maybe it's going to be how to open the door.
I think there's such an importance to it being a consistent part of the company culture and incorporating it kind of throughout the year or the month and in these little things so that kind of they have more of an impact throughout the year, as opposed to you have one week where you get a day off and company kind of shows that they are invested in this, but then every other, like the 51 other weeks of the year, there's deadlines and meetings and the expectations change a little. So I think there's a little more authenticity when it's kind of year round. And I think it also can empower the employees to work, be better at their, like, be their best selves and work to continue to like enrich the company and the culture when they feel like they're getting that from their company as well.
So consistently open the door, as opposed to there's a mental health week, a mental health day, a mental health thing that you have to listen to or do. Jamie, how about in healthcare? Is mental health thought about in the world of healthcare? Just curious.
Yeah, I think especially with the pandemic, I think healthcare has a long way to go still. It's so interesting to hear of a concept of a mental health week. I mean, that just purely does not exist in the hospital. And I think maybe even from just the therapeutic side, I think even when I walk into a patient room, for example, I pick up very quickly if they're in the right headspace to maybe talk about advancing treatment plans or receiving a diagnosis. And so I think maybe spinning that over and just kind of thinking about how, as an employer or a supervisor, if you kind of just want to walk into the space and kind of just feel out and maybe assume that, err on the side of them maybe not really being in the greatest headspace rather than assuming that they can truck through it, would be a really helpful piece, especially for folks who may not always have the voice to speak up, I think, too, for themselves.
So I think that's really good advice for people who are listening and trying to think about how can they improve their leadership or their managerial skills, that it's incumbent on us to fully integrate mental health, not pick a day or a speaker or a time, and to open the door for people who may be less comfortable to bring up the topic until they are comfortable.
One thing that we had done on a project that I recently worked on that I loved, I'm a fully remote team member, and I would say like about 85%, maybe a little bit less of the folks that I work with are also fully remote. And when we were working on a project, pretty tight deadlines, we'd actually gone through an exercise to outline like at what point of day do we get our best work done individually, kind of like charted it on a little mural board. And I love that because something that I learned was that I'm an early bird, but actually my leader likes to close her day at 5, be there with her kids, make dinner, whatever that looks like. And then she, like, from 9 to 10 or 9 to 11 p.m. is like really her time to just like get into work or anything that's being asked or anything that we need from her. And so I really loved knowing that up front, because now I'm able to understand like when can I expect to get feedback from her or like updates to move on to the next day. And so learning about that about each team member, I think, was just really helpful exercise, so we can all kind of understand the ebbs and flows of folks, no matter where they are in the country, as we're all working together.
You brought up the topic of working remotely, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is very recently, federal employees have been told they have to go back into the office 5 days. Many corporations have suspended their remote work and are asking employees to go back in the office 5 days. Now, I know some of you who work for the state, Allie, or for a hospital, Jamie, you may have to be in the office. But for others of you, this may be a change. And I'm wondering, what is your reaction to that? And again, how are leaders better leaders in having a conversation about this topic?
There's definitely an expected change in the way that we commute to work. For those in federal positions, we're going to see how that plays out, but it should be approached, or at least recommended approached, in a very gentle paced way. Because if you think about it, our lives were very much immediately upheaved during the pandemic, and we made a complete pivot to, okay, we're working remotely now. And then it might have seemed like it was a gradual progression back into a hybrid work capacity, but many of us still are not used to the fact that, okay, maybe we go in twice a week, we can take care of other things. There's some of us who go in maybe just once a week or once a month. So all of that is to say that, whatever decision is made per company or organization, it's best to approach that with some level of consideration for those who are going to make a lot of other changes in their life. Those can be things like daycare. How are you handling daycare if you have children? If you were taking care of someone, what does that change look like? If you've moved further away from your office, like what major change are you going to have to make now to report back in? So I think it's not something that's going to be an easy transition for employees, even over the course of 1 year. It might take longer to get used to the way we were, and hope that it works out as a gradual process, not something that we expect to work or make sense over the next year.
So gradual transition, don't just flip a switch and expect people to be able to change the game. For those of you who are going to have to make a change, or who have decided that they might not be willing to make a change, do you think that there's value in being in the office? Do you think that people still need to be in an office 5 days? Have we gotten better at managing remotely so maybe we don't have to? Curious about that. That's another boomer thing that I get beaten up on a lot is, I like being in the office. I like to have people in the office. I'm used to that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best.
My experience is that I've really been a remote worker since I graduated college in my entire professional career. And I definitely feel like there are some things that I've missed out on. Like, I think in terms of development, just the ease of, being able to ask a question or being able to shadow someone that you respect and find those role models and seeing how they work and seeing how kind of leaders interact and all the little things that you see being in the office and that you learn from. But I think to Lauren's point as well, like it's very personal, especially for people that have been used to working from home for years, maybe moved away or have kids. So I think that there's definitely a need for some empathy with return to office. And then I don't know the answer to this, but I beg the question of if you need 5 days to achieve the benefits that you get from being in the office, like maybe there's some flexibility on, if you can achieve what you're looking for by being in the office by being 3 days a week or by working with each individual employee, if the company is, small enough to be able to do that, working with each individual employee to understand like what their needs are from going into the office and what's feasible for them.
I think there are pros and cons, but at the end of the day, it's a preference. I am very much an extrovert, and I have a lot of peers who are very much introverts. So although it might fill my cup to have that conversation, it actually might completely drain someone. And I will say my least productive days are in the office because I'm in back-to-back meetings, and that doesn't mean they're back-to-back meetings in person. It often means I have a headset at my desk. I have to listen to other people in meetings, or I'm sprinting around to find a conference room. And then also, there's a lot of chit chat, So I think those days are my least productive. I very much like being at home because I can knock things out the door. But I will say, the work-life balance, I think, is honestly really hard for those days you're at home because you can keep going. And I think a lot of people who are at home will keep going all day instead of almost pushing people to feel great about coming in. I think we need to meet people where they are. And if they have to come in, that's fine. But I think the narrative needs to change that this might not be your most productive day in.
Interesting to think about being in the office as a less productive day. What about networking? Because one of the things that I like to address in each episode is how do we lift each other up, build networks, and maintain networks, which is something I have found during my career, women don't always prioritize. And being in the office, does that help with that informal network?
It's nice to have those natural interactions where you don't have to seek out whatever you're looking for from your colleagues. It just naturally, they're like, hey, what would you do about this? Whereas for somebody, it just removes a barrier of, okay, who should I contact about this versus this person's walking down the hall and let me just ask them, whereas I might not have interacted with them otherwise. So for me, it does have that value to be in an office setting and have colleagues with different levels of experience, different opinions, and perspectives. So that for me, it's really valuable in that way.
I know there was some rationale or level of rationale where it's like, okay, well, our systems, our security systems are somewhat more vulnerable when our personnel work from home. And that's something that we're looking at too. And like how threat landscapes are sort of evolving and our systems more secure if we're housed in one central building that's, more safe, we'll put it that way in generic terms. But I think that's one of the arguments, which is the reason why I answered. It depends on the department.
But that's interesting. I had not thought about it from a threat standpoint. You could argue maybe this data is more secure if everybody's in one building, but the people are less secure. For all of you who are thinking about the days in the office not being productive, maybe flip it on its ear a little bit and think about I am building my network, which is something I'm pretty passionate about and that I find is not always a top priority for women.
I do think whatever a company decides to do, I think they also have to realize that this can actually really impact how many job applications, how people feel about coming in if you're forcing them to come in. Like I saw a stat the other day, I think it was over 65% of people were not willing to remotely apply for a job that required them to go in 5 days a week. And I think that number is getting higher and higher. So I think if you're really sure about your company model, then that's great. But if you're trying to reach more people, I think people are really looking for this flexibility. I don't know how much I love it, but I think when you make a mandate, people get even more frustrated because it's something versus maybe it could be a conversation with your employees. What does flexibility look like for you? If we were to make you come in 5 days a week, is there something that would make that better?
I think it's really beneficial if the company can be transparent about their goal. So if it is to get people networking and in the office, then great, then that should be the goal that day. And then you are being productive if you're doing coffee chats all day, and that's fantastic. And you've met what the goal is of that in-person work day. And from a different perspective, when we're serving the general public as the clients and we want them to be able to walk into the office and get an appointment, then we have a different model where we're not all in the office on the same day, but we're alternating who can be at home and who needs to be in the office to serve our walk-in appointments. So I think it definitely depends on the team, but within that team, it's beneficial if there's some transparency about why do you need to come in and why is that helpful for us overall.
That seems to be a common theme, to share the why, not just the what, but the why. The why for, talking about mental health, the why for flexibility, the why for being in the office. And, these are things that I think historically corporate, government, schools, hospitals haven't really addressed. But if it's true that 60+% of talent doesn't want to apply for a job that's 5 days in the office, talent will win out. And the organizations are going to have to share. They're going to have to think about the why. I think sometimes they don't. It's just habit. It's how we always did it. And they're going to have to share the why. What do you think it takes to build strong leaders in 2025? Are there one or two characteristics that you've seen that we should all be thinking about modeling, teaching, training, recruiting for? And what are those? Does anybody have a thought on leadership characteristics of the 2025?
Probably my favorite characteristic and something that I even look for when I was in a hiring position, but even just as I look for across talent on teams, is curiosity. And so something that I've always appreciated about folks who are always curious to learn more, and whether that's kind of what you were mentioning, Lauren, of like taking a class, or maybe you're going to attend an event that's related to our industry, or just like working in a day-to-day project to, find opportunities to grow or try something new or try a new pathway that maybe we haven't explored before. And so I think something that I have looked for, but also try to do as someone who is hopefully becoming a leader in my organization is kind of lead with that curiosity and be open to change, be frankly looking for change or ways that we can continue to evolve.
An echoing theme always is inclusion. And I think what that means especially is just really keeping even your junior members in the loop, just so you can kind of project and see like what's ahead, because you can't really visualize, where things can go if you don't even know what's available to you. So for example, my boss in particular, I think does this really well because she will CC me opportunities for, within the larger school or maybe within the industry. And even if I don't have the space or mental capacity for it right now on my plate, kind of just knowing that it is there for a time when I will, I think is really helpful and might not have been an email that one really even would have known about. So
the ability to orient yourself outside of the situation and look at it from different perspectives and remove your own biases is extremely important. And part of that self-awareness comes into play when you're talking to a diverse group of people, which that's not going to go away regardless. You have to be able to understand how the decisions you make or the way that you communicate or whatever your responsibilities are, how they impact others on your team. And then, of course, be aware of where you want to grow as a leader, and be open to feedback across levels, not just from your peers as a leader, but at that junior level is important as well.
So not just openness to change, but openness to feedback. And we talked earlier about asking for feedback in little bite-sized quantities, if not in big quantities. Making sure that you remember the junior folks as you think about including them in what opportunities might be available to them. General self-awareness and particularly of your biases. I think it's an interesting time in the world to think about how we hold ourselves accountable for respecting diversity and for understanding our biases, because our organizations might not.
I was going to add just being a good listener. I think a lot of issues come from people not listening. And that goes from when in the marketing world, we'll say, like, we recommend this artwork, and it's like everyone's on one side and someone else is on the other. And I think that's a good balance to have because you want to be pushed and challenged. But good leaders are really always willing to hear you make your case. And like after that, make an educated guess.
One of the things I wanted to ask you all is what should we be listening to, reading, looking at to help us become better? Maya, you had a thought?
Yes, actually, what my manager recommended also a TED Talk to me, and it's called How Great Leaders Inspire. And it's this idea of how leaders inspire, and oftentimes inherently we think about like speaking to the what and then the how and then the why. But how great leaders inspire is often reverse, talking about the why and then the how and then the what.
So there's a TED Talk called The 10 Ways to Become a Better Listener. And as someone who's more extroverted, like I actually try to not always be the first person to raise my hand and just let others speak first, or leverage the chat, because I know some introverts might actually feel better leveraging the chat. Little things to just really try to see what other people are saying and hearing them.
Definitely something I will listen to, 10 ways to become a better listener.
I think in the wake of the rise or the increase of natural disasters that are springing up around the world, not just in our country, this is a small window of opportunity to take a look. If you have the frame of mind to look at your TV or reports of the people who have to speak to these matters and how certain bodies are responding to it, how they're mitigating the situation, or how they move people whose entire lives have been upheaved, and really pay attention to how those spokespeople or leaders in their communities talk about the situation and how they handle it. And those are not necessarily the people who we immediately identify as like the celebrity or infamous leader. We don't necessarily think about them right off the bat, but I think those are good folks to just study and pay attention to. And I'm sure, unfortunately, there will be more opportunities to do that with wildfires and hurricanes and all other sorts of natural disasters. So just see how they handle situations like that.
That's a really interesting perspective. You guys are all probably too young to remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but somebody asked Mr. Rogers, how do you deal with horrible tragedies, mass casualty incidents, natural disasters, shootings? Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. Look for the people that are trying to set things right. Don't focus on the bad, focus on the good. And while that may not be a particular podcast or video or book, I think that's a great way to think about it, and to always look to the helpers and look to those who are solving the problems versus creating the problems. And that's why we're here, you guys. Thank you so much for helping me think about some of these challenges. As I said, I am going to invite you back if you're willing. And I like to thank you and then end each podcast with the immortal words of my mom, Arlene Barnett, who said, "You don't have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, just what you're going to do next." So thank you. And please join us, everyone, on our next podcast at Dauntless Leadership.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Everyone.